All right, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, brothers and sisters, friends and enemies, thank you for joining us here on We Act Radio, broadcasting live from the radical side of Martin King Avenue, the underbelly of the nation's capital, the foothill of Cedar Hill, the line of the Casa Frederick Douglass home, the bicentennial. And we are so honored to have our guests joining us here in the studio today. Well, via the World Wide Web in the studio here today. And we're talking about the fact of Venezuela and America going back to them after failing to crush the Bolivarian Republic with their hat in their hands to feed their oil addiction. And here to join me today is Mr. Paul Pumphrey. Paul, to give you the opportunity to introduce yourself.
Yes, my name is Paul Pumphrey. I am a founding board member of Friends of the Congo, as well as I'm on the National Coordinating Committee for the Black Alliance for Peace. I've had the opportunity to visit Venezuela twice. I've also have worked with my brothers and sisters from Venezuela for about the last 10 to 15 years. And I came up through the civil rights movements here in the United States. I also was an organizer for the United Farm Workers Union and worked with the farm workers for 3 years in the state of Florida. That's about the short of it.
And also joining us here today is Mr. William Camacaro. He's a Venezuelan American, co-founder of Bolivarian Circle of New York, Alberto Lovera, and a senior analyst for the Council of Hemispheric Affairs. He holds a master's degree in fine arts degree in Latin American literature from City University of New York. And he here to represent the Alliance for Justice, Global Justice.
Hello, Global Justice. Yes, I'm the national coordinator for the Alliance for Global Justice.
Thank you so much for that correction. And again, thank you, gentlemen, for joining us here today. So let's just get started, because we have to realize that much of what we've been fed in the media here at Western media here in the States and abroad sounds just like the war drums that was beaten for Iraq when they sold us this bit of goods. And we can see how they're projecting as if this compassionate plea for the Ukrainian people that is getting public sympathy. But in actuality, America doesn't care anything about Ukrainian people. They're there for their NATO expansion. They're there for using them as a pawn. We're trying to paint a picture on understanding that Ukraine is actually a pawn in this game of, these superpowers. It was said before, Dr. Amos Wilson said that here we are, two white men who are threatening the survival of the world, and we are praying that they all get along on a planet that is majority non-white. Is proof that we are all crazy and the world is upside down. But this is the situation we find ourselves in. And recently, we've seen where America has gone back to Venezuela with their hat in their hand to feed their oil addiction. So here we are. I leave it to you gentlemen, Caple's hand to try to make sense of what is not making sense to the world around us. Brother William, you want to take first stab at that?
Okay, thank you very much for inviting me, to having me here today. Yes, basically it's extraordinary what's going on right now. It seems to, for a lot of people, something that is laughable. It's almost like a comedian, and where United States have the main role. United States has been basically sanctions a bunch of countries all over the planet. And now, thanks to the sanctions that they have been imposing to the entire, more than 50 countries already have been are sanctioned right now. Washington backed itself into a corner. So, and for that reason, they basically have to go to Venezuela and request to President Maduro, the possibility to make business, to buy Venezuelan oil, to alleviate the situation in the United States and Europe. But it's so funny when you see, for example, Juan Gonzalez, who is the advisor for the hemisphere for this administration. Juan Gonzalez, when he's talking in the media, he said, okay, yes, we recognize Juan Guaido but we had to talk to Maduro because he is the man on control. And this to be and the diplomacy is very painful. It's not something easy, and we are defending our interest, but whatever we are doing is because we are worried about Venezuela. So it doesn't make sense at all what they are talking about. It's because they are in a corner. They themselves have been putting United States in a very ridiculous role in the international arena. I think that also with this situation between Russia, United States, and NATO, this is a new configuration, international configuration that is right now is warning, and we are, basically seeing that in the next few years, the United States will not be able to play this role that was played for the last 10, 20 years. And we will see a bloc formed by Chinese and Russia, and another bloc formed by United States and Europe. The problem is that Europeans, they don't have really anything in terms of natural resources to offer to United States. So right now they are facing this terrible situation. The Europeans are basically crying because they really are paying the price of this confrontation. And this is something that's putting, as you mentioned, the entire humanity in a very dangerous situation. We are talking about two superpowers that have the capacity to destroy the planet several times. And and this is a situation that has been happening for already 8 years, and no one was mentioned this for 8 years. More than 40,000 people have been killed in Ukraine, and no one has been counting those people that have been killed. But now everybody is worried. Now the Russia react to European, to the Western, so everybody is worried because yes, this is a very dangerous moment. So this is very, very interesting because also the Latin America is changing. Just yesterday, Gustavo Petro, who is the leftist candidate in Colombia, he basically won the primaries, and he basically won the Congress. He is in control of the Congress, and this is very critical because he will be, uh, according to the poll, he will be able to win very easily in the first round in 2 months, 3 months. So, so United States will be losing another ally in South America. Already, we have an election, very critical election in Brazil, and Lula is going to win those, according to the poll, will be winning that election very easily in Brazil. So that means the United States will be alone in the entire hemisphere, and for them will be extremely difficult, for this elite that is connected to the entire military complex, will be very difficult to move anything in the entire hemisphere.
Mr. Pumphrey, the U.S. narrative, the Western narrative, is that the good people of Ukraine were innocent civilians until the maniac Putin invaded their sovereign country for no good reason. Can you unpack that narrative that's been proposed in Western media?
Well, one thing I would say about the Western media is this: for the last 20 years, the Western media told the people of the United States and the world, the United States had defeated the Taliban in Afghanistan. The United States had established democracy in Afghanistan. That the United States had helped Afghanistan develop its economy. But the reality was that as soon as the United States, and that the United States had also developed a well-developed army that could protect the government's interests in Afghanistan. But within a few days after President Biden announced that the United States military was going to leave Afghanistan, What did we see? One, the Afghan army got out of their uniforms and tried to blend back into the general population. Two, the Taliban took over control over 90% of the country. Three, the president of Afghanistan, the so-called democratically, properly elected president of Afghanistan, went to the central bank, stole billions of dollars, jumped on a plane, and left the country. So then add on to the point that the US government spent over $3 trillion of our tax dollars in this war in Afghanistan, with the media, basically repeating everything that the State Department and the White House was saying about all the victories they were having there. Now we got the same media, the same the White House again, Congress, coming to the people of the United States and saying, oh, we're concerned of Russia coming into Ukraine, and that in fact, the aggressive posture of Russia should cause the whole world to be concerned. Well, that helps me to go back in my memory to 1962, when the United States was trying to intimidate Cuba. And Cuba then worked out an agreement with the Soviet Union to bring nuclear missiles to its island nation. And the US government went ballistic. In fact, President Kennedy threatened to go to World War III to prevent the Soviet Union from bringing nuclear weapons within 90 miles of Key West. So my question is this: when the United States openly talks about bringing Ukraine into NATO, into the European Union, how is it that Russia will not feel threatened? Because when they brought Poland into NATO and the European Union, they also put nuclear weapons in Poland. When they brought the Romania into the European Union and NATO, they put nuclear weapons into into Romania. So it seems that the US is creeping closer and closer to the border of Russia. And President Putin openly said repeatedly that the last straw is an attempt of trying to bring Ukraine into NATO and the European Union. Yet you have the US government openly talking about, yes, this is our desire to do so. You have the Ukraine government saying the same thing. So how is it that the United States has the right to say, we have the Monroe Doctrine, that no government we consider an adversary can develop any type of military relationship with any country within the Americas. And that goes all the way down to Argentina and Chile. But yet, in fact, the United States can threaten to bring the country of Ukraine, which covers a tremendous part of the border of Russia, into NATO, even after President George Herbert Walker Bush had admittedly said that he would never expand NATO any further east if the Soviet Union agreed to let East Germany become a part of West Germany.
And Mr. P, let me put a pin right there for our listening audience. The great filmmaker Oliver Stone has a wonderful film called Ukraine in Crisis. And his interview with Putin made a point that what you just mentioned, that they wouldn't move an inch east, wasn't put in writing, and they wish that they had done that. So I think our audience should go back and watch Oliver Stone's Ukraine in Crisis to get some backstory on in addition to everything you just said on how we got here. I'm sorry to interrupt. Please continue.
Yes, and so it's clear that if we're going to look at who's the aggressor, who's the bully, Let's look at the military budget of the United States. Over $700 billion. In fact, when the US Pentagon put their request in for a budget this year, Congress opted on an additional 20-some billions of dollars. What is the military budget of Russia? $62 billion. So on the one hand, you got United States with $700 billion invested in military. Now, are we afraid that Canada is going to invade us? Or that Mexico is going to invade us? Or that somebody is going to come to the United States to threaten the United States from the Atlantic Ocean or the Pacific Ocean? No, we're not. So why is the US government having such a desire to spend so much of our tax dollars on our US military when the US homeland is not being threatened? Yet, when you look at our cities, there's tremendous need for fixing up housing. We have so many people homeless. When we look at just how the US was able to handle this pandemic that we just went through. In fact, we lost so many people, and many of them being Black and people of color, who lost their lives because the US government did not have the resources or did not choose to use the resources it had available to it to really address this pandemic in a very serious way. And yet, we're wasting over $700 billion. We have a whole naval fleet within 20 miles off the shore of China on the other side of the world. Who's threatening who? We got billions of dollars since this is after the United States said we don't have money for students to go to college for the first 2 years and have the government pay for it. But the Congress turned right around and spent billions of dollars to send weapons and other types of supplies.
Or money for a Green New Deal.
Right. I mean, so they're lying to us. And they're using our tax dollars to put in the pockets of large multinational corporations and to intimidate countries trying to do things for their people. I had the opportunity to spend time in Venezuela, as well as Nicaragua. And I can tell the audience that they do better in trying the government's resources in trying to help the people of their country live a better life. Yet we have a government that spends over half of our tax dollars, over half of our tax dollars on military operations that have nothing to do with our country. It only has to do with the intimidation that the United States imposes all over the world for US corporations to rip off countries throughout Africa, the Caribbean, Central America, and many parts of Asia. And so clearly, this situation could have been avoided by the United States not trying to threaten the sovereignty and the borders of Russia. But the US decided, no, as long as US lives are not going to be at stake, we're going to push Ukraine to do it, knowing that Russia made it very clear that if Ukraine did it, that it was going to take military actions against Ukraine. And at the same time, our press kept so quiet about the Ukrainian government using its own military to attack its own people, in which was mentioned by the speaker before me, by William, that 40,000 people had their lives ruined by weaponry being given to Ukraine by the US government. And the media basically said nothing about it. There's not 40,000 people who've lost their lives, but yet when you turn on the TV news or the radio news, over 50% of the newscast is talking about Ukraine today. How is it they all of a sudden now discovered Ukraine? Just like how did they back in 2001 discovered Afghanistan. And I would encourage the listeners to this program to do a little bit of homework. Because if you Google heroin production in Afghanistan and look for a 20-year chart that's on the internet today.
It went up.
In 2001, heroin almost disappeared in Afghanistan. That was when the United States went into Afghanistan for its war. And then every year after that, Afghanistan produced more heroin than the rest of the world combined.
And coincide with an opioid crisis here in America.
No question. In fact, the United States imported more heroin from Afghanistan during the 20-year war in Afghanistan than any other place in the world.
There's American companies with their own poppy fields. You know,
well, the question has to be asked: what in the world is going on here? How is it if the United States has such a great military and it had such great control of its military? How is it that they even had drones, which meant that you didn't have to jeopardize the pilots of the drones because they were down here in Nevada. They could have destroyed the poppy fields throughout Afghanistan. But the US government chose not to, even though they knew it was a heroin epidemic in this country coming from Afghanistan.
Let me add something. Hello, brother. Cool. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, I hear you fine. Go ahead, brother.
Yes. Okay. Something very important that we should highlight is the fact that when we have the crisis in Cuba, the missile crisis, we have to remember that the Soviet Union stepped back immediately when they realized that that could take us to a nuclear confrontation. Right now, United States not only is not stepping back, it's putting more firewood putting more firewood to the fire, and it's creating a situation that probably will not have any return. And that's very, very extremely dangerous. And that's only because the big military industrial complex get a lot of money from those contracts with all those nations from NATO. Remember, when the Soviet Union was in place, only 12 countries were part of NATO, and every country as a member of NATO, they have to pay some amount of money annually to be member and to be able to buy weapons to United States. That's the business that they have. So now they have around 30 countries, and every member has to pay a big amount of money to United States. And sometimes also the weapons are subsidized with the taxpayer. And that's a very, that's not something that benefits anyone on this planet. And also that is, again, the interest of the United States people and the citizen, the common citizen here in the United States. But I also want to mention something that we have to pay close attention in the next coming days. Venezuela highlights the need to recognize Maduro as a president to resume oil exchange with the United States. Since that meeting happened, United States have been very quiet. Venezuela, just make his first step, giving away two people that were accused of corruption to the government of United States. But United States has not been saying anything else because they don't want to recognize Maduro as a president. And it's something that is hard for the empire to swallow. So I feel that also I have to mention something that a lot of people maybe don't know. We are in a very big campaign to get free Alex Saab. Alex Saab was a Venezuelan diplomat that was basically kidnapped by United States twice. One, when he was in a trip from Iran to Venezuela after he made business with Iran on behalf of the Venezuelan government. So he was trying to get vaccine, medicine, equipment for hospitals. He also was helping to get food because Venezuela wasn't able to do that because of the blockade.
Mr. Camacaro, go put a pin right there for our audience. We have to explain that he was doing that as a result of trying to sidestep U.S. sanctions against Venezuela that was causing undue hardship and instability in your country. I'm sorry, please continue.
Yes, thank you. Yes, basically, he was a ambassador of Venezuela in front of the African Union. He was an ambassador of Venezuela in the African Union. He was also a special envoy to Iran and also to Russia. And when he wasn't doing all those business on behalf of the Venezuelan government, he was detained despite that he was a diplomat. He was detained in Cabo Verde for 1 year, and then from Cabo Verde was sent to United States, despite there was no extradition, any agreement of extradition between the two nations. He was sent to United States, and now he is incarcerated in Miami, in a federal court in Miami. United States only. He has been tortured also. I have to mention that, torture. He is a person that has a cancer. He has not been receiving any treatment, medical treatment. And also what is important to say is that the United States, one is to know how Venezuela have been able to get food, medicine, what the network that Venezuela have been able to create and how they can dismantle that network. This person has been basically tortured, and they are trying to get information from him to really suffocate the Venezuelan people, to really strangulate the Venezuelan people and destroy the Venezuelan government. So I just encourage everybody to join us to the campaign to save Alexa, to make Alexa free.
And we hope that that was on the table when American officials came back to Venezuela with their hat in their hand, again, to continue to feed.
Was on the table.
I just want to get a little fact right here. This is something you won't hear on Western media. Exxon, Chevron, and Conoco made $46 billion in profit in 2021. Now they're using 40% of their profits for stock buybacks. So big oil is raking it in, raising prices and taking advantage of the war in Ukraine to push for more drilling. And at the same time, they're raising prices. And then, as Mr. Paul pointed out, you have people flying the yellow and blue flags in the world's sympathy, but at the same time, they've been financially exploited. But people like the CEO of Goldman Sachs says it's not Wall Street's job to ostracize Russia. So it's for them, it's still business as usual, but they're expecting people to make their sacrifice of paying more for gas, when in actuality, that's just price gouging. And also, Mr. Pumphrey pointed out that about America's insane military spending. Martin Luther King said that a nation that continues year after year to spend more money on military defense than on programs of social uplift is approaching spiritual doom. So we have in America the greatest military budget since World War II. That is where we are right now. And the Venezuela representative to the UN, who condemned the U.S. role in Ukraine via NATO expansion, he said this: to avoid a chain reaction that will lead us walking mindlessly into the abyss. That is where we are right now. And for those who have some problems, because we speak favorably of Cuba, we spoke favorably of Iran sidestepping sanctions against Venezuela, and of course we speak highly of the Bolivarian Republic. These are not favorable terms to the American public, but what they need to realize is that Madiba, known to the world as Nelson Mandela, said this: that the enemies of the West are not ours. And we must begin to see ourselves separate and apart from the American imperialist foreign policy. And that is why they are beating the war drums now. But having said that, the UN resolution denouncing Russia's invasion in Ukraine, there was a number of countries that either voted against or abstained. In fact, let me get my notes here. Apparently, 24 African countries didn't support the UN, which I found illuminating. 16 abstained, 7 didn't even vote, and Eritrea, I guess Eritrea is becoming the Cuba of Africa. Let's see if that's holding water, voted against it. I want to put that out there, guys. What do you take of these countries who abstained from the UN resolution to condemn Russia?
Well, you must also look at the fact that India, as well as China, did not go along with that resolution. And those are the two most populous countries in the world. We need to be very clear. We have a government that says it doesn't have money for a decent national health program in this country. We have a government that says it doesn't have enough money to put people in school and make sure people have decent housing, make sure people have decent ability to generate income to support themselves and their family. This is what we have. At the same time, they've thrown away hundreds of billions of dollars into the pockets of the major military industrial complex. And I was very clear on this when I saw the pick that Biden chose to head up the Department of Defense. He brings a former general who was on the board of Raytheon, a major military industrial contractor, to be in charge of deciding how we're going to spend our money on the military. Hello, how's that any different than Cheney when he was vice president, sending so much money back to his former company that he was president of? We need to understand that the US government has worked very hard to finance the largest corporations in this country. Let me give another example. When we had the pandemic, you had our Congress vote to give $2 trillion towards the working people in this country and small businesses. But most people miss the fact that that same Congress in that same bill offered $5 trillion to the largest corporations and banks in this country. So let's see, $2 trillion is supposed to help take care of 125 million people. And $5 trillion is supposed to take care of 125 major corporations. So in whose interest is Congress using our tax dollars for? Obviously not for the people of this country. Now people say, well, wait a minute, I never heard no $5 trillion going to the large corporations. Well, let's go back and look at the law. What did the law say? The law said that government was going to set aside $500 billion to give to the Federal Reserve. In return, the Federal Reserve was going to make loans to the large corporations of this country. Well, if anybody studies the law, they know that for every dollar that the Federal Reserve gives, to a bank, the bank has the ability to loan out $10. So 10 times 500 billion is 5 trillion. So the United States, in a roundabout way, Congress, US Congress, people scream and holler about President Trump. And I have my issues with President Trump as well. But the point was, Congress, which meant many of the Democrats that's on Capitol Hill today, voted to give that $5 trillion to the large corporations. And what did those corporations do with that money? They used that money to buy their own stock back. Because there were many people were suffering through the pandemic and were selling their stock at low prices. And so they bought their stock back and drove the prices of their stock through the roof without tax dollars. These are things we need to do our homework on and understand how both the Democrats and Republican Party work against the working people of this country and working people around the world.
Mr. Camacaro, in the last US-led failed coup attempt in Venezuela, the Civil Corp had a contract for $200 million if they had succeeded in overthrowing the Bolivarian Republic. This is the country where water costs more than gas. The first country after America announces that they are putting an embargo or they're stopping Russian imports of oil, the first person they go to is the home of the largest oil reserves on the planet. And they deny that they're there to talk about oil. They was only there to talk about freeing some American that was being held in Venezuela's prison. Do you have any insight on this? Because I always like to point out to people that it's not always just what they do, is when they do it. And clearly the cat is out the bag that this is all about geopolitics. They are willing to destroy the world in order to control the last drop of oil, which in itself is actually polluting and leading to destruction of the world. Can you unpack it?
We're talking about the president who's the clean climate president. The president says that he's committed to dealing with global warming, with climate change.
Well, he didn't support the Green New Deal.
Well, anyway, yes, in my opinion, yes, they went there to request oil. When Blinken is basically talking on the TV and the press conference, they always mention, oh, we went there to propose the exchange. That's what they say in their first press conference, to exchange prisoners and to advocate from American system that has been incarcerated, unjustly incarcerated by the dictator. They don't mention first that 3 of them were USA terrorists that were got there with several weapons, with a big amount of cash, dollars, and that were working with the bishop with several paramilitaries, some Venezuelan and some from Colombia, that wanted to organize a coup d'etat against Venezuela. I think that everybody remember the little boat that was captured by several fishermen in a small town in Venezuela, and several Americans were there. So they are talking about those guys. These little angels that went to Venezuela to offer food for the Venezuelan people because the USA blockade. No, they are worried for these guys. But at the same time, they went there they mentioned this first. Oh, we want to liberate the prisoners that have been unjustly there for the years already. And we want also to establish some kind of relation with Venezuela. But basically, as you mentioned, the geopolitical situation that right now United States is facing, the reality that Iran is not able to offer any oil to United States because it's under sanctions, and they have to go to a big discussion and several negotiations between Europe, United States, to be able to get some resources from Iran. And the reality is that Saudi Arabia is not willing to increase their production, and Mexico is not willing to help them. So they are alone. So they go to Venezuela. So the last minute, the last person to talk, Nicolas Maduro, sweating and swelling very hard, because they know that they have to recognize Nicolas Maduro as a Venezuelan president after all these years of lying, and after all those years of incriminating President Maduro. Even, you remember that the government of Donald Trump put a price for the head of Nicolas Maduro, $15 million. $15 million. So they are negotiating with this person that they basically are willing to provide $15 million for his capture. So it's completely ridiculous. I think that we need to get some people with common sense in the White House, in the lead of this country, because this is a self-destructive policy that is in the White House and the State Department, and that is going to affect the entire country, and also it's affecting the entire planet. And the last, I think that Venezuela wants really to need to get those that commercial relation with United States, because the sanctions have been affecting the entire country, but they need to do the first step. And the first step is to recognize Nicolas Maduro as a Venezuelan president.
But I say a couple of points.
Feel free, Mr. Paul.
And that is when the United States put the embargo against Venezuela, they did something else that the media refused to talk about. Most of us know that Venezuela owns the oil company known as Citgo. The United States pretty much took over Citgo and then turned around and told Citgo that they must refine oil coming from Canada, not from Venezuela, but from Canada. Okay, and so what's happening now is that you got a company that United States pretty much commandeered away from Venezuela, and they're helping Canada make money off of its oil because Canada has a lot of very heavy oil. Heavy oil is very hard to refine, and that many of the refining capabilities in the United States is not designed to refine heavy oil, but Citgo is. So the United States has used a Venezuelan government-owned company to make money for Canada. And this is maybe one of the reasons why Canada has gone along with some of the crazy policies that the United States has put before the world, unjust policies that they have put before the world, because in fact, it's taking a government-owned refinery company and start using it as a means to help Canada generate more income off of the oil coming out of Canada. So,
and there you have it.
It's very criminal. It doesn't have, in my opinion, it has no conscience of doing what's right. You have a president who sits back and tells everybody how much he believes in climate change and climate warming on the one hand, but then on the other hand, he does just the opposite. And it's high time that we need to connect the dots. For example, when we look at the Vietnam War, what political party escalated tremendously the Vietnam War versus what political party got out of the Vietnam War? And why? When Johnson was president, he highly escalated the Vietnam War. But then when Nixon became president, people were willing to go out and demonstrate against Nixon where they weren't willing to demonstrate as much against Johnson. And so the people's movement was able to force Nixon out of Vietnam. And this is a very clear point. When it came down to apartheid in South Africa, the media put Jimmy Carter as the human rights president of the United States. Yet on the other hand, Jimmy Carter allowed for the apartheid regime to continue on with very little restrictions. And many US corporations and banks very much involved in it. And the people didn't come out in the streets to challenge US foreign policy with apartheid until Ronald Reagan got into office. And once Ronald Reagan got into office, then people felt comfortable in demonstrating against the US government. So as long as people allow themselves to be manipulated by political parties rather than behind what is right and what is wrong, we lose. And our enemies then understand how to manipulate our country into doing things that is very wrong, because they will find that people will be more hesitant to demonstrate. When Obama gets in office, what happens? This country basically bases its money on oil because it no longer has gold as a standard to back up the US dollar. So what then happens? You see that the US government has, when any country who has oil says that they will not accept US dollars for their oil, United States goes after them with a vengeance. Saddam Hussein, for 10 years, fought against Iran. And the United States gave him all kinds of aid, including anthrax. The US government gave Saddam Hussein anthrax, and then turned around and tried to tell the world they thought Saddam Hussein was crazy. Why would the US give him a biological weapon if they thought he was so crazy? But when Saddam Hussein said to the world he would only accept euro dollars for his oil, the United States went to war with Saddam Hussein. Muammar Gaddafi, as head of the AU, began to use his oil money to start buying up gold, to back up a new currency that he wanted to establish for the continent of Africa, the African dollar. And what happens then? The United States under Obama leads the way to destroy Libya, the country that had the highest standard of living in all of Africa. The country where if someone needed to go to college and the classes weren't taught in Libya, they got a full scholarship to go study those classes in other parts of the world. The United States used their military dollars to destroy their country. And what happened after they destroyed the government in that country? They had open slave markets where people of African descent was put up on the stocks to be sold as slaves inside of Libya. So we need to be clear here. What is the policy of the US government? It certainly doesn't seem to be one of democracy, one of justice, but one that is a facilitator for the greediest corporations in the world. And until we begin to recognize some of the crimes that our government does in the name of our country and the people who live in this country, and begin to hold the elected officials accountable for their crimes, this world will move closer and closer to world destruction.
I want, Paul, I want to mention, yeah, the something that is also very serious, that something that we are missing in all this conversation is the new scandal with Ukraine in the biochemical lab. That is something so serious. And the United States accused to have around more than 339 chemical lab, all the biochemical lab all over the planet. And it's something extremely serious. And the fact that all those, a big number of those labs that were in Ukraine, were so close to the border with Russia, so it makes sense to me that could be one of the main reasons for the Russia to take over and to react to the attack, because it's an attack. I see this reaction from Russia as a self-defense, no, from the Western United States. The only thing that I wanted to add about Citgo that you mentioned, and I think that it's important for people in the United States to know, when Chavez came to power in 1998, Citgo was not producing any revenue for Venezuela. Venezuela was sending a bunch of oil to the United States, but Citgo was not sending any revenue to Venezuela. The executives of Citgo, all of them were American citizens. There were no Venezuelan in the Citgo company. And in the mid of the Chavez administration, Citgo started to produce revenue. And there was a moment that Citgo will provide $1.2 billion to the Venezuelan people. So that company that cost around more than $30 billion have been expropriated by United States. And they are using that oil that they are getting from Canada. They are using those refineries to refine that oil that's coming from Canada, because the oil from Canada is very heavy and the oil from Venezuela is very heavy. So, and those refineries are basically are able to work with that kind of oil. So, so they have been even thinking and to expropriate Citgo for years because the idea to build this pipeline from Canada to the south was to take the entire oil to the Venezuelan refineries that belong to Citgo. That was the idea from the beginning. But now they are, everything is, as Blinken said in his press conference, everything is in discussion, and this is a discussion with we have multiple issues to discuss here. Yes, they have multiple issues. They have to talk about the gold that have been frozen by several banks, especially UK, a bunch of money that is frozen in different international banks, and only in Portugal, Venezuela have $2 billion that have been frozen, and around 2 billion that have been in gold that are frozen in UK. And there is a bunch of money all over in Japan and Canada that have been frozen, and also money that have been took away from Venezuelan people and here in United States from different USA banks. All everything has to be discussed because you cannot be talking to someone that has been trying to kill you for almost 20 years, because this is not new. This is something that's coming for 20 years. Normally, and then because you are screwed by your own policy and you need the oil and you need to be safe, you think that people are going to react immediately and say, hey, yes, that's good, let's make business. No, you need to fix a bunch of stuff before we start to sell oil to you.
And we need to move away from a U.S. military economy. Again, it makes no sense.
Where's a war economy?
Yes, military war economy.
Yes, a war
makes
economy.
No sense for the United States. I mean, it's one thing to spend $30 billion to redo the infrastructure of this country, or $100 billion or $200 billion to rebuild the infrastructure of this country. Several things happen. One, we end up with better highways. We end up with better electrical power supply. We end up with a number of things, as well as a number of jobs that creates other jobs. But when you spend money on a bullet, what can a bullet do or a bomb do but kill people? It has no positive, down the line benefit to society or the world at all.
Dwight D. Eisenhower warned about the military-industrial complex in his farewell speech. I encourage our audience to go pull that up and watch it. He talked about how guns and bullets and bombs constitute a theft of schools and education and highways and infrastructure and what have you. I want to give everyone a chance to close out and give our audience some, not just a homework assignment, but what you would like to see done. What is things that people can do to start to exert their will on a system that is hell bent on war and destruction? And as as the UN representative from Venezuela said to the UN, to avoid a chain reaction that will lead us walking mindlessly into the abyss. In our closing comments. But before that, Mr. Camacaro, I have a question for you in your closing comments. When the UN General Assembly passed a resolution condemning Russia of their actions, the same actions that America took in Iraq and around the world that wasn't condemned by Western media, by the way. We talked about the people that abstained or voted against, but I read that the Venezuelan vote wasn't counted due to debts owed to the organization. Do you have any insight into that in your closing comments, sir?
Venezuelan debt were counted.
It was said that the vote of Venezuela was not valid due to its debts to the organization. I'm assuming the organization is the UN.
Well, let me tell you this. Are you talking about the electoral process in Venezuela? No.
No, I'm speaking specifically about the UN General Assembly and their resolution condemning Russia's actions.
Condemn Russia.
Okay.
Resolution before the UN to condemn Russia.
Venezuela didn't vote. The Venezuelan vote was neutral, and this we are talking about the document that was published by the UN during this just few weeks ago.
Yes, correct.
Basically, Venezuela didn't vote. Venezuela, also Cuba, Nicaragua. But this makes sense to me because we are talking about a small country that they basically they support Russia, but there is a fact here that they have to take in consideration that it's a big country getting into a small country. So in this Venezuela, Russia, and Cuba, Venezuela, Cuba, and Nicaragua are very small country that could be, attacked anytime by United States. So they didn't vote against that resolution, and they stay away from that resolution. But that doesn't mean that they don't support Russia. In fact, if you Google a little bit, you will see that President Maduro, the first thing that he did after the war came out, after Russia invade Ukraine, basically, well, the first thing that he said is that we support Russian government because it's in a situation that he has to defend his sovereignty and he has to defend his people. It's a way to see this. Again, this is a very critical moment for everybody. I think that people should take close attention to this situation in Russia and Ukraine, United States, because it's going to affect us all over. And also, I want to invite everybody to join us to the cause of Alex Saab, to free Alex Saab, because Alex Saab was a diplomat that was helping Venezuela to avoid the sanctions and to get food and medicine for the Venezuelan people. And this is something that could be used against any country that is under sanction. And right now, we have more than 50 countries that are affected by the USA sanctions. And only
I've never heard of a diplomat being arrested.
Yeah, he's a diplomat, Alex Saab, that was arrested and that had been kidnapped, basically kidnapped by United States. And then right now is here in Miami in a federal prison, accused of being money laundering. As someone that has been in court several times, someone that was in a court investigated by the court of the African Union, and also that was investigated by the Switzerland court and have been found not guilty. But United States decide to extradite or to kidnap the person from Cabo Verde, and bring him here, accusing him of money laundering. That is something completely ridiculous. And the basis to bring him here is just because he was avoiding the sanctions and he was the person that gets, and maybe everybody knows this, that get all those big super tanks full of oil, gasoline that went to Venezuela in the mid of the 2020, in the middle of the pandemic. Just 1 month after he was incarcerated in Cabo Verde. So, and that moment was completely critical because at that moment, President Maduro, the government, and people were, especially people, were suffering a lot from the sanctions. So I'm inviting everybody to join us to the campaign, Free Alex Saab.
Lost the volume.
Sorry, thank you, Mr. Camacaro, for all the work you're doing on behalf of the Bolivarian Republic of the people of Venezuela. Mr. Paul, your closing comments.
My closing comments is simple. We need to look at what our government has done. Again, what they have done in the past and now attempting to do again. We should not allow ourselves to become victims of being lied to as to what the real purpose of our policies has to be. The US government and the US media have lied to us about what caused this war in the first place. The same way they lied to us about the whole issue of why we went to war with with Iraq, as well as with Afghanistan. And that we end up spending billions and billions and billions of dollars, the same billions of dollars that they cannot invest in making life better for the people of this country. Instead, they give those money to these large multinational corporations so that they can go around helping the US military destroy people's lives around the world. we must say enough of this, that this must come to an end. And if people believe in democracy, then they need to stand up and let their voices be heard. And remember the lies that the US media keeps telling us about. They did not tell us at all about what happened in the Congo when US companies wanted to steal the minerals out of the Congo. And from 1996 to 2006, the UN estimate over 6 million people were killed right there in the Congo. 6 million. And yet, the media said nothing about it. You couldn't even find articles that much about what was going on.
No Congo's flags been flying there.
And in fact, the armies they used were the armies of Uganda and Rwanda. And the only countries in Africa that the media consistently tries to speak in a very positive way about in dealing with development is Rwanda. And we must wonder why. Maybe because that government allows itself to be a tool in killing people so that US and European companies can rob the minerals out of the Congo. We must say no to this, and we must demand more from the media of the United States, that the media of the US must tell the truth about what's going on and the role that these multinational corporations are playing. Now, this happened before when we demonstrated in the 80s against apartheid. Then the media seemed all of a sudden to discover apartheid, a system that started back in 1948. And all of a sudden, the media discovered it and began to start being more accurate in explaining what was going on in Southern Africa. So, yes, we the people can force.
And initially they called Nelson Mandela a terrorist. He was called a terrorist. And
even when he was a president, he was on the US Department of State terrorist list. And they finally took him off of it. So we must be clear here that we have a job to do. If we believe in democracy at all, we have a job to do in challenging the wrongdoings of our government and how they choose to spend our money, as well as our media as they choose to lie and propagandize untruths throughout the media. So again, I throw the ball back to the people here listening to this show. It will be left up to us to demand. And if you would be interested in more information, I encourage you to go to the website of friendsofthecongo.org. That's www.friendsofthecongo.org. And I also encourage you to go to the website of the Black Alliance for Peace. And that's blackallianceforpeace.com. If you go there, there's a number of articles that we have on that website in addressing the issue of not only Ukraine, but what's happening here in the United States, as well as the continent of Africa. Thank you.
Mr. Paul Pumphrey, I want to thank you. And I also want to thank you because you were instrumental in me being able to spend some time in the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela before the pandemic in January of 2020. That trip was made possible because of you and your activism. And one of the beautiful things that I saw while I was there was this huge billboard, and it depicted Hugo Chavez, Fidel Castro, and Nelson Mandela on the billboard. So that should summarize the beauty of these countries who are standing up to the imperialism of America. And people need to realize just because we are here in America does not mean that our interests are those of American interests, particularly when you have countries like companies like Goldman Sachs and all these weapons manufacturers are making money hand over fist, and not to mention the tax subsidized oil companies who are price gouging right now. In closing, America is in the grip of a dictator The dictator in America is money. That's Oliver Stone. I encourage our listening audience to go check Oliver Stone's work, Ukraine in Crisis, to get a better understanding of what is going on and their role and plan to address it. So again, I want to thank everyone for joining us here today for Venezuela and U.S. relations during Ukraine-Russia conflict with Black Alliance for Peace and Friends of the Congo, Paul Pumphrey, and Alliance for Global Justice, William Camacaro, and two white men deciding the fate of an earth that is majority non-white while we all praying they get along is evidence that we're all insane and the world is upside down. That is Dr. Amos Wilson. This has been Kimon Freeman, Angry Black Man in Therapy, representing the worldwide We Act Radio on the radical side of Monarchy Avenue in Washington, D.C. I want everyone to stay safe, stay strong, stay woke, and educate yourself on what you can do to interrupt us from walking mindlessly into the abyss. Peace and blessings.
Thank you, my brother.
All right, I think that went pretty well. And I'll be posting it and be tagging you shortly, Brother Paul. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for your inspiration. I want us to stay in more regular contact because your wisdom should be amplified. And I think we're at that point in time that we got to do more. So as long as you got the energy, you got a platform with us here anytime. Okay, brother?
Okay, thank you, my brother.
Love you, brother. One love.
Peace, peace out.